We're probably all familiar with the food pyramid, but is it still relevant? The first version of the food pyramid was published in Sweden in 1974, and since then, this way of showing the relative amounts we're meant to eat has gained popularity in many countries. At the base of the pyramid are the foods we should eat most of, and at the top, the foods that should be limited. In 2015, Nutrition Australia published a new version of the healthy eating pyramid, which is similar to the original, but instead of grains being at the bottom, vegetables and fruits are. Many nutritionists, including myself, are really happy with this change. It's also good to see different foods in the grain section, so oats and quinoa, rather than just bread and pasta. Nutrition Australia, which is a non-government organisation, publishes this pyramid, and it's based on the Australian Dietary Guidelines, which are published by the Australian Government. Belgium released a new food pyramid in 2018. The pyramid is turned upside down and food groups divided into green, orange and red zones. I really like this way of depicting what to eat because it's simplified and clear. People read usually from top to bottom, so it makes sense that the most important foods should be at the top. There's also the double pyramid, which takes into consideration the environmental impacts of food choices. In these pyramids, which are based on the Mediterranean diet, we can see that the foods that we're meant to be eating most of, like vegetables and fruits, have a much lower environmental impact than the foods that we should eat less of, such as meat and cheese. The Americans have ditched the food pyramid altogether, instead opting for MyPlate, which is a plate image showing the relative amounts of food that should be included in the average diet. The problem with this plate model and the food pyramid is that people don't really eat all of these foods at one meal. So it's meant to be more of an average diet across the week or life. And Australia's answer to MyPlate is the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating. This is slightly different to the MyPlate because it depicts pictures and examples, which I think is really helpful. So this guide is essentially the same thing as the pyramid, but just in a different format. Outside the plate are the eat sometimes foods or junk foods, so highly processed foods and alcohol. Most Australians get more than 1/3 of their energy intake from these foods, and this is a major contributor to the obesity epidemic we're facing. Generally, the plate guide is helpful. However, one critique is that in the grain section, white rice and white pasta are included, which aren't really nutritionally ideal as they're more processed than their whole grain counterparts. The other critique is the oil section. I personally would promote oils like olive oil and fats like butter over polyunsaturated fats like margarine, canola and sunflower oil, because the benefits of these polyunsaturated oils and fats found in margarine and sunflower oils are being scrutinised, and in fact they might have adverse effects on health. The final criticism of the food pyramid is about the influence of industry in developing these guidelines. The book Death by Food Pyramid discusses the influence of the wheat and corn industry groups in the development of the original food pyramid in the US, which emphasised grain consumption over other food groups. So it's always a good idea to critique nutrition information sources, even if they are from the government. Nutrition guidelines change in Australia about every 10 years. However, encouraging people to emphasise real whole foods over processed junk food is never going to change. Research does suggest that if people stick to the dietary guidelines, they have 30% less risk of developing obesity, and for men, 40% less risk of developing high blood pressure. So eating to the guidelines works to reduce disease risk, and the pyramid is still relevant. The problem isn't the guidelines or the pyramid. The problem is that 7% of Australians eat enough vegetables, instead preferring energy-dense foods like burgers and chips, ice cream and pizza.